King Charles stunned after finding this clause about Harry in the Queen's will. The corridors of Buckingham Palace have long been the setting for history, tradition, and secrets held close within royal walls. But in November 2025, a quiet and surprising revelation unfolded that would shake the monarchy in ways few could have anticipated. King Charles, who had spent decades learning the nuances of duty, protocol, and public expectation, found himself facing a private moment of profound significance. Within a sealed envelope, long hidden among the estate papers of Queen Elizabeth II, lay a clause specifically concerning Prince Harry. At first glance, it appeared as a formal piece of legal instruction, a standard part of estate planning. But as Charles read through the carefully drafted words, it became clear that this was far more than a routine matter. This was a deliberate, thoughtful, and deeply personal decision by the late Queen, meant to influence family dynamics and guide the future of her descendants in a way that history and headlines would only gradually uncover. The clause outlined conditions for Harry's inheritance, conditions that were intended to ensure continued connection to the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth, even as Harry had chosen to build a life abroad. This was not a command, nor was it punitive. It was Elizabeth II's final effort to preserve ties within a family fractured by distance, disagreement, and years of public scrutiny. For King Charles, the discovery was a mixture of shock, reflection, and responsibility. He had inherited not only the crown but also the duty to navigate the delicate balance between respecting his mother's wishes and managing the realities of relationships that had grown strained over time. The legal team and senior advisors present during the reading could sense the weight of the moment, the silence punctuated only by the soft shuffle of papers and the steady tick of a mantel clock. This clause, though seemingly simple in wording, carried decades of history, personal emotion, and familial expectation within it. The specifics of the Queen's clause were carefully measured. Prince Harry would inherit a significant portion of the private estate, totaling approximately £20 million, but this sum was not merely financial. The late monarch attached conditions that emphasized connection and responsibility over wealth. To access the inheritance fully, Harry would need to spend a minimum number of days each year in the United Kingdom or within Commonwealth nations, engaged in charitable, community-focused, or family-oriented activities. The Queen's intention was clear: independence could be preserved, but ties to family and heritage were not to be severed. In practical terms, this meant that while Harry could maintain a life in California with his wife Meghan and their children, Archie and Lilibet, there remained a formal expectation of engagement with Britain, its traditions, and the royal family. The provision also included a smaller fund of roughly £5 million dedicated to the education and upbringing of Harry's children, overseen by trustees approved jointly by Harry and the reigning monarch. Through this carefully structured approach, Elizabeth II aimed to provide financial security, uphold family bonds, and ensure that future generations did not grow up completely detached from their lineage. It was an intricate balance, respecting Harry's autonomy while reaffirming the importance of shared responsibility. Even in her final days, the Queen demonstrated a remarkable understanding of timing, ensuring that this clause would come to light after her passing, during a period when Charles had assumed full responsibility as king, rather than leaving the decision to the heir apparent or to public debate. The emotional dimension of the clause was equally significant. Queen Elizabeth II was not only a sovereign who understood the power of law and protocol, but also a grandmother deeply invested in the well-being of her family. Prince Harry had always shared a close bond with his grandmother, and the Queen had witnessed firsthand the joy he brought to her life, from his playful humor in childhood to his independent spirit as an adult. Yet, Harry's decision in 2020 to step back from royal duties and relocate to the United States had created tension within the family, particularly with Charles and other senior royals. The public nature of Harry and Meghan's interviews, memoirs, and media appearances had reopened old wounds and fueled speculation about loyalty, expectation, and the responsibilities of royalty. Through the clause in her will, Elizabeth II sought to offer a pathway toward reconciliation, one that did not demand forgiveness, but that provided structure and opportunity for connection. Her carefully chosen words framed the inheritance not as a reward or punishment, but as a gesture of love and foresight, demonstrating her commitment to keeping the family united even beyond her own life. King Charles's reaction to discovering this clause was a mixture of personal reflection and measured responsibility. Alone in his study, surrounded by the familiar trappings of monarchy, leather-bound books, polished mahogany, and the subtle weight of tradition, he understood that this was not merely a legal matter. It was a deeply human one. He thought of the years he had spent observing his mother's guidance, her diplomacy, her ability to balance public and private life with grace. Yet here, in the quiet of that November morning, the role of king gave way to the role of son. Charles could feel the enormity of his mother's intention. She had crafted a bridge between generations, offering a chance for Harry to reconnect with family and history, while also challenging Charles to navigate the complexities of paternal and royal responsibility simultaneously. There was no rush, but there was urgency. The timing was deliberate, the consequences immediate. Every decision Charles made from this point forward would ripple across family dynamics, public perception, and the enduring legacy of the monarchy itself. The clause's provisions could potentially shape how Harry and his children related to the royal family, and how the public perceived the institution's ability to balance tradition with understanding. The hidden clause also brought into focus the broader context of reconciliation. Charles arranged a private meeting with Prince William at Clarence's house to discuss the matter, away from cameras and advisors. The conversation was tense and reflective, highlighting the contrasting perspectives between generations. William, deeply committed to preserving both family dignity and the public perception of the monarchy, viewed the conditions attached to Harry's inheritance with a mixture of caution and skepticism. While he understood his father's desire to honor the Queen's wishes, William remained wary of the potential for renewed conflict or misinterpretation. For Charles, balancing these perspectives became a matter of diplomacy within his own family. The clause had set the stage for negotiation, patience, and careful communication, all while navigating the complex interplay of legal obligation, public scrutiny, and private emotion. The stakes extended beyond inheritance. They involved healing, perception, and the long-term cohesion of the royal family. Across the Atlantic, Harry and Meghan were living a carefully curated life, balancing media engagements, contracts, and family responsibilities. They were largely removed from the immediate pressures of royal duty, yet the discovery of the clause signaled that distance could no longer equate to separation. The expectation that Harry maintain annual presence in the United Kingdom or Commonwealth created both logistical and emotional challenges, highlighting the tension between personal choice and familial obligation. For his children, this also introduced questions about identity, belonging, and the continuity of heritage. The Queen's foresight in including Archie and Lilibet in the provisions ensured that the younger generation remained connected to their roots, even if physical distance persisted. For Harry, this required reflection and consideration of what balance could be struck between independence and legacy. The legal and strategic implications of the clause were carefully crafted. Elizabeth II consulted trusted advisors to ensure enforceability and clarity. The inheritance was structured to avoid disputes while guiding Harry toward engagement without overt coercion. This demonstrated her lifelong understanding of both legal frameworks and human behavior, a skill honed over decades of leadership. In practice, it allowed for flexibility, negotiation, and compromise, acknowledging that relationships are rarely straightforward and that family dynamics, particularly those under public scrutiny, require sensitivity and foresight. The clause also served as a subtle message to the monarchy. Reconciliation and connection were always preferable to estrangement, even when challenged by public controversies or personal decisions. Beyond the immediate family, the clause also carried a symbolic message for the monarchy itself. It highlighted the continuing evolution of royal traditions and demonstrated how personal relationships and empathy could intersect with centuries-old protocols. The Queen's final gesture emphasized that leadership does not exist in isolation. It must account for both human emotion and institutional continuity. For the public, the revelation of this clause provided insight into the private deliberations and care that often underlie royal decisions, reinforcing the monarchy's image as not only a symbol of authority but also a family navigating complex, real-world issues. Ultimately, the discovery of the clause placed King Charles at a crossroads. The decision he faced was not simply about legal execution but about the kind of father, king, and mediator he wished to be. Every choice had implications for family harmony, public perception, and historical legacy. The clause was both a gift and a challenge, a quiet bridge across a generational divide that required courage, patience, and understanding to cross. Its very existence underscored the Queen's lifelong commitment to family unity and continuity, and it reminded Charles that the work of preserving bonds does not end with the passing of a monarch. It is a responsibility inherited by each successive generation. As the world watched from afar, unaware of the private deliberations unfolding within Buckingham Palace, the Queen's intention remained clear: connections, once established, could be maintained, distances, once created, could be bridged, and love, carefully guided, could transcend past misunderstandings. The clause was not a demand, it was an invitation, a framework for dialogue, and a final act of maternal foresight. It reminded the royal family and the public alike that even amid headlines, interviews, and media scrutiny, family ties remain central, and reconciliation is always possible if approached with thoughtfulness, patience, and courage. The discovery of the clause, the conversations it prompted, and the actions it inspired would continue to influence the monarchy for years to come. The path was not predetermined, outcomes depended on willingness, communication, and understanding. But through it all, the Queen's final gesture ensured that love, guidance, and foresight remained at the heart of the family's story, a quiet testament to a reign defined not just by duty, but by enduring care and humanity. The specifics of the Queen's clause were carefully planned and very thoughtful. Prince Harry was set to inherit a large portion of the private estate, around £20 million, but the money itself was not the most important part. The Queen attached clear conditions to the inheritance, emphasizing connection, responsibility, and family ties rather than just wealth. Harry would need to spend a certain number of days each year in the United Kingdom or in Commonwealth nations, participating in charitable work, community service, or family-related activities. The Queen's message was clear: even though Harry had chosen independence and distance, he should remain connected to his family, his heritage, and the nation that had shaped him. Beyond Harry, the clause also included provisions for his children, Archie and Lilibet, setting aside around £5 million for their education and upbringing. Trustees approved by both Harry and the reigning monarch would oversee these funds, ensuring continuity and guidance. The Queen's intention was to create a bridge, offering financial security while reinforcing family bonds across generations. She wanted her great-grandchildren to feel connected to Britain and the royal family, even if they grew up far away. Importantly, the clause balanced freedom with responsibility. Harry could continue his life in California, pursue his career and personal choices, but the clause reminded him that family and history should not be ignored. Elizabeth II had carefully chosen this timing, ensuring the clause would be revealed only after her death, when Charles had assumed full responsibility as king. It was a quiet, deliberate move, demonstrating her understanding of timing, emotion, and legacy. Through this provision, she sought to keep the family united while respecting personal choices, showing a blend of wisdom, foresight, and deep care for her family's future. King Charles's reaction to discovering the Queen's clause was a mix of shock, responsibility, and reflection. The moment he realized the full implications, he understood that this was more than a legal instruction, it was a personal message from his mother, a final attempt to guide the family he now led. Charles had spent decades learning how to handle public scrutiny, political pressures, and ceremonial duties, yet this situation struck at the heart of his role as both king and father. The clause was carefully written to be enforceable, precise, and conditional, meaning that Harry's inheritance was tied to specific actions that reflected commitment to family and tradition. It wasn't about control, but about connection. The Queen had clearly thought long and hard about the distance that had grown between her sons, about the public disputes, and the personal feelings that remained unresolved. By structuring the inheritance this way, she was attempting to bridge that gap in a formal but meaningful way. Advisors in the room recognized the delicacy of the moment. They understood that King Charles would need to navigate not only legal responsibilities but also emotional dynamics, generational tension, and public perception. Every decision he made now could affect the monarchy's image, the relationship with his estranged son, and the upbringing of his grandchildren. The clause forced Charles to consider a delicate balance, honoring his mother's wishes, encouraging reconciliation, and protecting the stability of the monarchy, all while confronting the unresolved wounds from Harry's departure from royal duties years earlier. As he reread the clause, Charles was struck by the weight of the Queen's foresight. She had anticipated challenges and placed the responsibility in his hands at a moment when he was fully empowered as king. This was no accident, it was strategy. The Queen's words carried a quiet authority, reflecting a lifetime of experience ruling a nation while keeping family ties intact. At the same time, They reminded Charles of the deeply personal role he now played, not as a monarch making political decisions, but as a son entrusted with his mother's final wishes, and a father asked to consider the future of his family. The documents, though legal in form, were deeply human in content. They called for diplomacy, patience, and sensitivity, asking Charles to act with wisdom that went beyond protocol. The room was silent, the advisers attentive, knowing that the unfolding decisions would ripple far beyond the walls of Buckingham Palace. In that quiet moment, the king realized that this clause would test not only his leadership as monarch but also his ability to heal family relationships that had long been strained, forcing him to weigh duty, emotion, and legacy all at once. It was a challenge unlike any other he had faced, a final counsel from a mother who had led with both strength and heart. The discovery of the clause left King Charles with more questions than answers, and the weight of those questions settled heavily on his shoulders. This was not simply a matter of money or property, it was a decision with profound emotional and familial implications. For decades, Charles had navigated the delicate balance of duty, protocol, and public expectation, yet this moment forced him to confront something far more personal, his relationship with Prince Harry and the next generation of the royal family. The clause was structured in a way that required Harry to actively maintain ties to the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth, ensuring that his children, Archie and Lilibet, would grow up with a connection to their heritage. This was a subtle but clear message from Queen Elizabeth, a way to preserve family bonds and legacy without overstepping Harry's personal autonomy. The conditions were practical and reasonable on paper, spending at least 90 days a year in the UK or engaged in charitable work tied to the Commonwealth, but they carried a weight of expectation that could not be ignored. Charles understood that these requirements would likely prompt discussion, negotiation, and perhaps even resistance from Harry and Meghan, whose life in California was carefully structured around privacy, work, and protection for their children. Beyond the immediate logistical questions, Charles also felt the emotional weight of the Queen's intentions. She had always valued family above all else, even when public duties made private connections difficult. Through this clause, she had attempted to extend a bridge to Harry and his children, offering not just financial support but a chance for reconciliation and inclusion. Charles knew that honoring this wish would require more than simply transferring money, it would demand patience, dialogue, and a willingness to engage in a process that might reopen old wounds. In the quiet of his study, he reflected on the years since Harry's departure from royal life, the public disputes, and the interviews that had aired grievances in full view of the world. The clause did not erase those events, nor did it demand that they be forgotten, it asked only for cooperation and connection, a delicate invitation to restore what had been strained. The advisers around him recognized the sensitivity of the moment, emphasizing that the family dynamic was as important as the legal framework. Every step Charles took would set a precedent, not just for Harry but for the monarchy's handling of future generational disputes. The decision would influence public perception, media coverage, and the perceived compassion and wisdom of the reigning monarch. As he considered his next moves, Charles weighed the balance between duty, love, and strategy. The Queen had placed the responsibility squarely in his hands, trusting him to navigate the intersection of law and family with the care she had demonstrated throughout her reign. In that moment, Charles understood that the clause was far more than a legal instrument, it was a final counsel from a mother who had ruled with both wisdom and heart, challenging him to act with courage, empathy, and foresight. As the implications of the Queen's clause settled in, King Charles realized that the challenges ahead were not merely procedural, they were deeply personal. The clause, while legally sound and carefully constructed, required him to navigate delicate emotional terrain that stretched across oceans and decades of family history. Prince Harry, now living in California with Meghan and their children, had built a life carefully shielded from the pressures of the British monarchy. Every decision about travel, public appearances, and engagement with the royal family was measured, protecting his family from the intense scrutiny that came with their names. The clause, however, reminded Harry, and indirectly, Charles, that distance did not have to mean disconnection. The Queen's careful language created a bridge, a pathway for renewed contact that respected Harry's autonomy while gently encouraging participation in family life and the legacy of the monarchy. Charles considered the practicalities first, arranging meetings between advisers on both sides, planning communications, and establishing the legal framework for Harry to claim his inheritance. Every detail mattered, from the 90-day minimum time in the United Kingdom or the Commonwealth, to the oversight of the children's trust funds, ensuring that both Harry and the reigning monarch were satisfied. But Charles also understood the emotional stakes. This was a chance to mend a relationship that had been publicly strained, a rare opportunity to restore trust and connection within a family that had been fractured by both personal choices and the relentless glare of public attention. He reflected on the Queen's intentions and recognized her wisdom. She had balanced authority with tenderness, leaving the responsibility in his hands while showing confidence in his ability to act with fairness and empathy. The clause was not an order, it was an invitation, one that required careful negotiation, patience, and sensitivity. Charles knew that any misstep could provoke misunderstandings or fuel criticism from both the media and the public, but the potential reward was far greater than risk, the chance to bring Harry and his children closer, not just to the monarchy, but to a shared sense of family and history. He also realized that the outcome would influence the next generation. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, already growing under public scrutiny, would observe how their father handled the situation, learning lessons about leadership, responsibility, and the delicate art of family diplomacy. This was more than an inheritance, it was a test of character, a challenge to balance the duties of a king with the heart of a father. In the quiet halls of Buckingham Palace, Charles felt the weight of history pressing on him. Every decision he made would be remembered not just in headlines, but in the legacy of the family he had inherited from his mother. He took a deep breath, recognizing that the Queen had prepared him well for this moment, trusting that he could navigate the intersection of law, love, and duty with the wisdom that only experience could provide. As he prepared to contact Harry and set the process in motion, Charles knew one truth above all: the next steps would shape not just inheritance, but the bonds that could either heal or further strain a family already tested by time, distance, and public life. Once the initial shock of discovering the clause had settled, King Charles knew that the next step was to consider how to communicate this delicate matter to Prince Harry. This was not just a legal or financial issue, it was a deeply personal family moment that required tact, sensitivity, and patience. Harry's life in California was far removed from the daily routines and traditions of the British royal family. He had built a protective environment for himself, Meghan, and their children, carefully balancing privacy with public attention, ensuring that their mental health and security were priorities. The clause, however, served as a reminder from his late grandmother that ties to family and heritage could still exist, even across continents. Charles had to think not only about how to enforce the conditions of the inheritance, but how to convey the intentions behind it, that this was meant as a bridge, a gentle nudge toward reconnection, rather than a demand. Legal advisors and palace officials had meticulously reviewed the documents, confirming their enforceability, but Charles understood that the human element could never be fully captured on paper. Every word he chose in reaching out to Harry could either foster trust or deepen the existing divide. Beyond the legal obligations, the clause subtly encouraged dialogue, cooperation, and mutual respect. It was not designed to force reconciliation through coercion, but to provide the means and opportunity for family healing, should both parties be willing. Charles reflected on the delicate balance the Queen had struck, acknowledging Harry's independence while emphasizing the importance of roots, continuity, and the shared history of the royal family. The stakes extended beyond Harry alone. The well-being and future involvement of Archie and Lilibet were central to this decision. Their education, upbringing, and connection to their heritage were tied to the structured oversight outlined in the clause, ensuring that family bonds remained intact across generations. Charles realized that any attempt to enforce or negotiate the terms required careful timing, empathy, and understanding of Harry's perspective. Public perception, too, could not be ignored. Every action taken would be scrutinized by global media, social platforms, and the public eye, and missteps could reignite old controversies. He understood that navigating this situation would demand not only the authority of a king but the patience, humility, and compassion of a father. In preparing to make contact with Harry, Charles also considered involving Prince William in a measured way, recognizing that the balance between duty and personal relationships was delicate. The Queen's foresight had ensured that this process would be both structured and flexible, allowing room for compromise while maintaining the core intentions of connection, responsibility, and family unity. As he contemplated the path ahead, Charles felt the weight of the responsibility his mother had entrusted to him. This inheritance was more than money, it was a message of love, hope, and the possibility of reconciliation, designed to shape not only the present relationship with Harry, but the long-term cohesion of the royal family and the legacy of Elizabeth II's reign. Every decision, every conversation, every carefully chosen word could ripple across generations, reinforcing the bonds of family or leaving them strained. For Charles, this was a test unlike any he had faced before, a test of diplomacy, emotional intelligence, and the enduring power of family ties, all in the quiet shadow of a mother's final, thoughtful wish,